Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is one in a series of programs called On Becoming Nature's Best Hope. We are recording tonight's program, and I ask that you keep your mics muted until the presentation is finished. You can put your questions in the chat box or save them up, and we'll have a question and answer period later. I want to just, first of all, let you know what's coming up. Remind you of our upcoming programs. On May 26th, which is in 2 weeks, we're going to be learning more about a topic that many of us were actually unaware of until we read Doug Tallamy's book, the 30 by 30 initiative to preserve 30% of the world's ecosystems by 2030. Our guests that evening will be Micah Kenfield, the Vassar College Director of Sustainability, as well as Marianne Cunningham, Vassar College Geography Professor and Director of Environmental Studies. That will be in 2 weeks. Then in June, we will have our garden visits. And I am just about finished with all of the scheduling of that, and I will make the full schedule available to all of you to sign up. We will have 4 opportunities for garden visits to the Roosevelt Home Garden, as well as the Beatrix Ferrand Garden at Belfield. We also will have the opportunity to go onto David Schwartz's property at Wind Ridge, which is right next door to the FDR property. We will also have the opportunity to visit Susan McNish's garden in Pleasant Valley, as well as Eileen Wazlowski's garden in Pleasant Valley. So I have these scheduled on a series of dates in late June, the 22nd, 23rd, 25th, and 26th. And now I just have to figure out how to make this all available to you in ways that you can sign up for specific dates, because we do have to limit the size of the groups that are going through the gardens. So you'll have to sign up, and I do have rain dates available. And we'll keep the group small. You'll wear your masks, and I'll give you instructions as to how to show up, when to show up, where to go, and all that. These will not actually be open to the public. This is really for our group, the Nature's Best Hope group, because I know if I opened it up to the public, we'd have way too many people and we'd be doing way too many visits for small group sizes. So that's the way it is going to be. So tonight we have the pleasure of Peter Muroski being with us tonight. He's the owner of Native Landscapes and Garden Center in Pawling, New York. The internet is chock full of glowing reviews of a wide variety of landscaping projects that Peter and his crews have accomplished all across the region in Connecticut and New York, as well as many appreciative notes from hikers who are hiking through Peter's Garden Center on the Appalachian Trail. But here to tell us in person how he got into this business is Peter Muroski. Thank you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody, on this beautiful spring day. It was a lovely day, a little bit windy, and it's a little bit dry out there. I know we've been getting rain, but it's definitely been a dry spring. And hopefully that doesn't lead to a dry summer, but it probably will, and we'll probably come out of this drought during a hurricane in September sometime. But anyway, native landscaping began about 40 years ago here in Pawling, and it became Native Landscapes. And now it's about to make another change to Native Landscapes and Garden Center, because we are now a full-fledged native plant garden center. And we also sell a lot of fruit trees and such. My love of the great outdoors started when I was a young child, growing up in Eastern Long Island. My mom was very much into gardening. Now this goes back into the 60s and 70s, when Eastern Long Island was still very much rural, like it is over here in Pawling, New York. And her and I used to do a lot of projects out back. We did patios. She had she loved roses, so we had a big rose garden. I remember going down to the local garden center and picking out like a 3 or 4 inch caliber sycamore tree that we planted on the front lawn. I mean, she really got me into it when I was a young kid. And not only that, but Mom loved the beach. And she would take us, one of her favorite trips was going over to Fire Island. And this is a trip that I'm going to tell you all about that I would recommend going this summer. We would go down to the ferry at Sayville and take the ferry across the Great South Bay over to a little docking area called Sailor's Haven. And at Sailor's Haven, there's an interesting piece of woods out there. It's now a national park. It's Fire Island National Park. And there's a spot, some of you may have been there already, called, it's an ecosystem forest, between the dunes. On one side, you got the Great South Bay, and you got dunes that get up about 15 feet. And then on the Atlantic side, you got the ocean and the dunes. And then it comes down and forms this woods that goes through the dunes. And it's a woods that's about 300 or 400 years old, and it can only grow about 15 feet tall. And because the salt spray blows away anything that tries to grow higher. So you got like a little mini bonsai forest in the middle of Fire Island that has, and this is one of the things that intrigued me when I was such a young kid. I mean, this is where I learned plants. You had hollies, American hollies growing in there. You had beech trees, you had cherries, you had all these wonderful plants, and they were growing in almost a miniature style. So, this is when I first got into this whole native landscape concept. And then, I grew up on the South Shore of Long Island. So, and Long Island is an end moraine. Long Island was formed by the last glacier. So the northern part of Long Island is a rocky hillside type setting, where the south part of Long Island is an outwash plain. And that's where, this whole ecosystem, this whole Pine Barren ecosystem exists on eastern Long Island, out on the Barrier Islands, down in South Jersey, out in Martha's Vineyard. And it's a very unique ecosystem on Long Island. And, I as a young kid, I started studying it and exploring it. And I found it to be very interesting. Plant barrier ecosystems, they're just, they're great. But anyway, I left Long Island, and by the way, that forest is called the Sunken Forest out on the Fire Island National Seashore. I left Long Island back in '73, and the problem with Long Island, we got there at '62 and we left in '73. When we got to Islip, the population of Islip was about 10,000 people. When we left in '73, it was 45,000. So, a lot of the problem with Long Island is that it grew too fast, and one of the problems they're having out there right now is they're having a water problem. So they're going to have to address that sooner than later. So anyway, we moved from Long Island to Pawling. And Dad bought a house. I was a junior in high school at the time, which is a very tough time to move. Dad bought a house on a mountain that was about 1,100 feet up on a hill. And, I was always a weather geek. I went to school for meteorology. And, I remember times up on top of the mountain where we would get like 18 inches of snow, and the village of Pawling would only get about 2 inches. I mean, that's, some of the drastic situations I used to see on top of the mountain. But if you walked down my driveway and walked east in the woods, you could go like 5 or 10 miles before you hit a road. And as a young kid, I would just explore those woods. I went down 2 or 3 miles. It would go into Sherman, Connecticut, and up on these hills, I'd see Squant's Pond and Candlewood Lake, and it was just a beautiful natural setting. But I do a lot of this hiking this time of year, and this is when I became very familiar with ephemerals. I'd go out there and I'd see these plants that I've never seen before, these bloodroot, these trillium, these trout lily out in the middle of nowhere. And, they would interest me. And, one of the things, I never did was dig them up, because I felt, the reason they were growing in this particular spot is because there was some kind of soil, or, there was something in the soil that they wanted to, that made them happy, and that they colonized in this area. So I would just go back there every year to check these things out and see how, they were spreading and colonizing. So, going through high school, my first job was at Trinity Pawling School. And that's when I was on the landscape maintenance program there. And that's, when I learned about pruning and ground covers and mulching. And, I knew that as a kid, but, this is when I did it on more of an industrial level. And I remember, when I first worked there, a lot of the trimming, you had a push mower and you had a pair of these hand shears that you kept in your back pocket. And if you fell on your back, they'd probably go through your kidneys. But this is before weed eaters, before anything like that. So, it was a crude method of maintaining Trinity Pawling back in the early 70s. But from there, I wound up going to Hammersley Hill. I got a job at Hammersley Hill, and some of you may know Hammersley Hill as back when I started, the Lowell Thomas Estate. The Lowell Thomas Estate at the time was about a 1,500-acre estate on the north side of Quaker Hill. And the estate was built by Mr. Fred French, who was a skyscraper builder back in the early 20s. And back in the late 20s, everybody with the crash went broke. But Lowell Thomas was one of the few people that were making money because, he was in the movie houses and he was traveling through all these exotic places on Earth. And just before you went to the movies, you saw these little clips about Lowell Thomas. So, and with Mr. Thomas, he had a 9-hole golf course around the house, along with, and I was the head gardener there at the time. But if any of you are into golf, Mr. Thomas had velvet bent greens on the golf course. And, every year it was an organic golf course. And every year in the fall, like clockwork, we go through and core aerify these greens. And we put a mix of sand, leaf mold, and lime. And we top dress these greens and seed it with the velvet bent grass. And, back in that, we were up high enough in elevation where these, I don't know if you've ever played on velvet bent grass greens, but they're really something to play on. But anyway, they were all, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas were also into cut flowers. And, this is where I learned how to, propagate cut flowers and vegetable gardens. And they had a lot of dahlias and zinnias. And she was into all that. Okay, so when Mr. Thomas sold the place, he sold it to the movie producer, Dino De Laurentiis. And when Dino took over the property, he brought us all together and he said, and this is before anybody knew anything about organic foods. He brought us all together and said, listen, I'm opening up DDLs on Columbus Circle, and it's going to be an organic produce store. And this is back in the late 80s, early 90s. He says, and I want to grow all the produce at the estate. And I just went, boom. And because I knew very little about growing organically. So I, force fed myself everything I needed to know to grow organic vegetables on the estate. And, we pulled it off in a couple of years. But that's how I got to know, and every time we went through all these changes, I learned a little bit more. After that, I went off to college. This was during high school and a little bit after high school. I went off to college where I studied meteorology, geology, and horticulture. And after I left school, I felt this was the time to start my business. Now, I do a lot of reading on my own, and this is when I started getting into this whole native plant concept, because as a kid growing up in Eastern Long Island in the Pine Barrens, I would be in these woods going around these places that were hard to get to. And I'd find these plants that didn't even know existed, like clethra and all these wonderful plants that grow in these out of the way places and with all these interesting insects. And, that's what really got me involved in this whole native plant concept. But anyway, when I started the business, I started to learn this whole symbiotic relationship that exists between plants, animals, and insects. That they depend on one another. And I know you've all read this in Tallamy's book. They depend on one another for survival. And when we start bringing in a lot of exotic species in the landscape, we kind of create dead zones in the environment. And to me, it's a quality of life. And this is how I explain it to my customers. You don't, when you do a native landscape, you don't have to put bird feeders out. You don't have to do a lot of this stuff that everybody does right now to attract birds to your property. The right plant will attract the most unbelievable insects and birds that you've ever seen before. So that's how I got into native landscape. and in the beginning, when I first started native landscapes back in the late 80s, I would call growers and ask them, hey, do you guys grow spice bush? Do you guys grow winterberry holly? Do you guys grow? And these guys would laugh at me and they say, nah, we grow Pfister junipers and Euonymus elatus and barberry, and because that's what sells. But because of you and I, we changed the whole genre of the plant industry. And one of the things that really changed it was, and I don't know how familiar you all are with it, is the American Beauty Program. Now, the American Beauty Program started with two nurseries, Pride's Corners Farm over in Connecticut, and North Creek Nursery out in Pennsylvania. And what they decided to do is they decided to create a line of plants, because everybody was asking for them, of straight species natives. Now, for the most part, that worked, but there are a few plants that you can't really propagate, and like phlox, for instance. Powdery mildew will hit a lot of the native phloxes. So they had to do some cross pollination and to get plants that are less resistant to some of the problems that's a few, but not many, that a few natives have. And one of the things that is a big topic of conversation these days is straight species natives versus cultivated varieties. And we go on these Cornell, UVM websites and Penn State, Farmingdale, and they're studying at this moment a lot of what's working, and for instance, Asclepias tuberosa, which is a butterfly weed. It comes in both orange and yellow, and the orange is basically the one you find in the wild, but the yellow also attracts the same amount of pollinators as the orange does. So there's a winner, and they're doing a lot of this with a lot of other plants. And while we're on this subject of butterfly weed, there's also this butterfly bush that everybody plants. And I was on Leonard Lopate's show one time, and he asked me he goes, butterfly bush is not native, and I get all kinds of butterflies on my butterfly bush. And what do you think of that? I says, well, take a little kid and you bring him up to the counter, and there's cotton candy on one side and there's a kale salad on the other. What do you think he's going to pick? He's going to pick the cotton candy, but that cotton candy has no nutritional value. So that's where mom comes involved and says, no, you're going to eat this tonight. So, there's a lot of things going on there that are, faking a lot of the pollinators out. So, these are the things that I think as research develops, because we're all about straight species natives, and there's certain suppliers that we use that focus their attention on that. For instance, Long Island natives on the South Shore of Long Island, they're a big supplier for us, and they propagate a lot of straight species plants. Glover perennials out on Long Island is another good one. And I said Pride's Corner is another good one. So the nurseries are starting to form, and we're starting to get the growers that are hearing our call, and that's where we are right now. And now, as far as buying native plants, and I know everybody wants to know where can I get them. There's quite a few nurseries in our area. You got the Catskill Native Nursery, over, I think they're in Kerhonkson. And then you've got us over here in Pawling, and there's a few others dotted around. But, one of the things we do here at Native is not only are we a nursery, but we're also a plant broker. So what we do is if you're an engineer or an architect and you have a plant list, we will find the plants for you at the size you need. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've got quite a list of suppliers out there that do grow native plants. And, we can find them for you, and we do find them quite a bit for everybody. Now, just like everywhere else in the construction industry, there is a shortage of plants out there right now. You know, we did a lot of our ordering early, so we didn't get caught. But I know with our second wave of ordering here and our third wave of ordering, there's going to be some tough plants to find. And a lot of the plants that we are finding, you know, because they need to be at landscape grade for the jobs that we do, are just not out there right now. So, but, you know, in our particular area, you know, but I haven't checked everybody yet. And, you know, we're working on it, but, you know, we're extremely busy. And we're we're moving ahead quite quickly. Let me tell everybody a little bit about what we do. You know, we're a full service landscape company. We do landscape construction. If you go onto our website, nativelandscaping.net, you'll see some pictures of some of the landscapes we've done. Native Landscapes and Garden Center on Facebook, nativelandscaping.net. We do very high-end work, you know, and it's always has a native flair to it. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, a lot of these customers hire us, because they'll hire us, an architect, and then they'll have me look at the plans and they'll say, okay, what plants can we use, Pete, in place of what this designer used to give it more of a native flair? So I would say that's one of the big things that we do right now from a native plant standpoint. We do maintenance, you know, we dabble in a lot of different stuff. And right now we're on a big project in Dover Plains. We just built a mini golf course behind Kelly's Creamery in the town of Dover. So if anybody out there is into mini golf, this is, let me tell you something, I've never done this before. And this was one of the most fun projects I've ever done. Learning about, you know, we got fountains, we got, and it's all dressed up in this whole native plant concept. And our goal is to open this golf course up in, you know, about June 1st. And I think we're going to make it. But, you know, we're having a lot of fun out there. And and we're just about done with it. So come out and see it as soon as you get a chance after June 1st. I want to talk a little bit about landscape trends these days and what I'm seeing in the field. I'm seeing a lot of people or customers going over to a more edible landscape. You know, not so much, you know, edibles in an orchard and in a certain spot, but, you know, incorporating a lot of these edible plants right into the landscape where, you know, instead of putting in a euonymus, you know, we're installing a beach plum and putting, you know, just, you know, blueberries here and elderberries here. And instead of using myrtle as a ground cover, we're using strawberries as a ground cover. That seems to be a big trend these days from a landscape standpoint. And when I go into a property and, you know, they want to go native, you know, I just don't say, you know, let's take a chainsaw, cut everything down. But what we can do is we can incorporate the natives into your landscape. You got a weak shrub over here, you know, we'll bring in American holly over here. You got, you know, you got a hole in the landscape over here, you know, that would be filled with a viburnum. You know, and a lot of the problems I'm seeing out there with a lot of these landscapes is it's very important. You know, everybody has deer now, and it's very important that a lot of these landscapes that we put in are deer resistant. And I do have I have many lists because I sit on the Dover Planning Board, and my lists are flying all over the county of plants for limestone soils, you know, plants for acid soils, plants for shady, dry, plants for wet, shady. And, you know, and then I also have a list of plants for that are deer resistant. And the list is more lengthy than you would think. You know, I mean, there are some areas like over in Sherman, Connecticut, where the only thing they don't eat is plastic and metal. And that's when you got to fence your property in. But, you know, for the most part, you can do this with plants that they don't like, you know, or that they won't eat. You know, I remember in the early days before the rules and regulations where you weren't allowed to feed deer, many of these estates back in the 60s used to feed the deer, and that would keep them out of their garden. But you can't do that anymore. So anyway, another thing I see today is people are staying home. You know, they're you know, they're not going anywhere, you know, because of the COVID, and you know, people's lifestyle has changed because of this whole COVID epidemic, and you know, because of that, you know, I'm you know, people are coming to. I see a lot of pools going in, and one of the things I talk to my customers about are natural pools. I don't know if anybody out there is familiar with a natural pool, but instead of these chlorine-based pumps, you know, you almost send the water through almost a like a wetland situation, and you have plants in it. And you know, the nice part about these natural pools is you don't have to cover them, and you can use them as hockey rinks in the wintertime. But you know, it's a whole new concept in pool construction, and it hasn't really set in yet, but it's out there, and people are starting to go that direction. Um, Lawn games, you know, setting your property up for croquet, you know, just so when you got there's things to do, badminton, you know, cornhole, horseshoes. Everybody is setting up a little club med in their backyard these days because they don't want to go anywhere. Um, Cutting down the size of the lawn. You know, a lot of times I'll come into someone's house and they'll have, you know, 6, 7, 8 acres of lawn, and I'll say to them, "What do you need this much lawn for?" "Oh, I like looking at it." I said, "Well, you know what you're gonna like looking at better?" And they say, "What?" I said, "A wildflower meadow." "Oh, you can do that?" You know, we've been doing wildflower meadows now for about 4 or 5 years, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I failed a lot at it in the beginning. Okay, went to Wiener's seminars. You know, got to started reading about it, got to know about it a little bit better, and you know, we are putting in wildflower meadows that are starting to work now. You know, a lot of people don't have the patience for a wildflower meadow because if you go in there, there's cultural requirements that come with this. You know, what the experts will tell you is to come in and totally kill a field, till it over, and then put your wildflower meadow mix so you don't have any competition. I don't know about, you know, using Roundup and a herbicide on a whole field is something you want to really think about because it's not the healthiest application for your property. So what we usually recommend doing is the first year, cutting the field or meadow really low, like a lawn, and get all these weeds or grasses so that they're real short, they're being stressed out, and they're not going to seed. When you cut grasses low enough where they're not going to seed, then you can put your wildflower meadow seed down. And in our area, it goes down between August 20th and like October 1st. Um, I'm a big fan of reseeding. So when I price out a wildflower meadow, I'm going to do 3 things for you. I'm going to prepare that meadow the first season. I'm going to seed it in the fall. And then next year, we have to cut it as the meadow reaches about 15 inches. We got to cut it down to 8 to 10 inches to cut out the competition because you got to remember it takes 3 years from a seed to go to a flower when it comes to wildflower seed. And there's and then also that next spring, I'll throw a whole bunch of annual flowers out there because a lot of people don't have the patience to wait 3 years, and I'll get them started with a little bit of an annual flower the first 2 years, and then I'll seed it again in the fall. And the reason I do this is because I want your project to succeed. You know, you know, the more it's just like renovating the lawn. The more grass seeds you put down on the lawn, you know, the quicker it'll germinate, the thicker it'll come in, and it'll push out all the broadleaf if that's the direction you want to go in a lawn. But we could talk about that too. I don't recommend herbicides on a lawn. I love my lawn that it's a mini perennial garden. You know, I love the violets in my lawn. I love the little blue flower. You know, if the lawn is treated right, it could be a mini perennial garden, and that's what my lawn looks like right now. And let me tell you something too. If dandelions were tough to grow, everybody would want them, and they're the most delicious green you ever put in your salad before they go to flower. Just remember that next spring, early next spring. So, Yeah, a deer resistant landscape. That's very important. Everybody, everybody now is very security minded. I mean, when I come in to design a landscape, I ask people a lot of questions. How much time are you going to put into your garden? You want to create a little bit more privacy. Do you have children? How much lawn do you really need to play soccer and baseball on? And what's the situation? So we put all that into a box, and then we come up with a design that works for each individual client. And I'll tell you another thing that exists real quick here before we cut off. I'll tell you another thing that exists here in the Harlem Valley. Soil pH is so important when it comes to landscaping. And I think a lot of you may know that if you've tried to bring blueberries into your property and your pH isn't at a 5.5 or less, because you need to have the right soil in order to make this stuff work. Now, here in the Harlem Valley, we got what's called the Harlem Valley limestone vein. And that's a very unusual soil that's here in the Harlem Valley that has a very high pH. And this is the reason why you can't grow rhododendrons and azaleas in certain places in Dutchess County, because of this whole limestone vein, which is very unique to a wet environment. All wet environments that where vegetation decomposes and it becomes compost creates a more acidic soil. And here in the Harlem Valley, we have a very limestone soil, which is a great soil if you know how to plant in it. Junipers love it, and and you just gotta get the right plants that'll thrive in that particular environment. Like I said, stay away from hollies, azaleas, and rhododendrons. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail goes through the garden center, and Native Landscapes is the base camp for the Harlem Valley Appalachian Trail community. And what that is it's a group of communities. There's about 35 of us on the trail that are here to help the hikers. We're a support system. And, for instance, here at Native Landscapes, we're a mail drop. We have showers. We have drinks for the hikers. We have rest spots for them. And we also have many events. Before COVID, we had many events for the hikers. We had the Warrior Hiker event. And now this is when a lot of the guys who are getting out of the military jump on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, and they're going to walk off the war. So when they get to Pawling, we have a big barbecue for them. We have a swimming hole for them. We do their laundry, and we just, we give them 3 days of rest and thank them for their service. We also have Trail Magic Day. Okay, so what is Trail Magic? Well, let's say you're coming up off of Cat Rocks and you're coming up on Westover Road, and it's a dry summer, all the streams are dry, and you're borderline dehydrated, and you get onto Westover Road, and there's 5 gallons of water waiting for you. That's Trail Magic. Now, we take Trail Magic to the next level. We start cooking bacon, egg, and cheeses in the morning here at the garden center, and we go over to cheeseburgers in the afternoon. And it's funny, about 3 or 4 years ago, we had this young gentleman come in, and he was literally crying. And I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "I can smell the bacon a half a mile away." So, we really, we love the trail. We love that we're part of it. We get letters all the time. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy sent me this letter today to tell me the Appalachian Trail is open. Come hike. COVID is over on the trail. We want everybody to come out and have their events again. And, let's get this going again. And another thing about the Appalachian Trail, we have, if anybody has been over here to the garden center, we have Metro North stops right behind the garden center. And we're the only train stop on the Harlem, well, throughout the Appalachian Trail, but the Harlem line is the only train stop that stops on the Appalachian Trail on Saturdays and Sundays. And this time of year, when the train stops, 30 or 40 people will get out with their mountain bikes. The other 20 or 30 people will get out with their with their backpacks and their camping gear. and they're out in the woods for the weekends, and I think it's a great thing, getting out into nature. There's something about being out in nature that makes us feel good. I don't know if, I think it must be like an endorphin thing. The same thing happens to me when I go to the beach. When I go to the beach in front of the surf, I just want to hang out there, because when I'm done at the end of the day, or if I'm in the deep woods in a big forest, it feels good. It's a feel good. It just, it was a great day. I got a lot of exercise, and I can't wait to do it again. So I want to thank everybody for having me here. There's a lot, a half hour's gone by. I could talk for about another half hour, and how I was on NPR about a couple of months ago with Dr. Douglas Tallamy. I'm a regular on the Leonard Lopate show, that started on WNYC about 5 years ago. And, they called me and asked me to be on the show with Dr. Tallamy. And I said, geez, I'm honored to be on the show with Dr. Tallamy. And I said, why me? And they said, well, we want Dr. Tallamy to talk about the science behind what he does. And then we want you to talk about the practical application. So, I've been on twice with Dr. Tallamy, and as we all know, he's our guru. He's the entomologist at a University of Delaware who speaks the word. And stop by here at Native Landscapes one of these weekends or days. We're open 7 days a week, 9 to 5. Wander around the garden center, grab a Klondike bar out of the refrigerator, and put your hiking boots on and walk the boardwalk behind the garden center, and maybe you'll see a moose. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Pete. All right. So we have several comments and questions that I'm going to start with in the chat. And then if folks have further questions, feel free to unmute. Let's see. Someone recommended Earth Tones Native Plants in Woodbury, Connecticut.
Yeah, another good one.
Okay, and I entered the nativelandscaping.net into the chat for folks to find you. Somebody commented that mini golf looks really cool. Can't wait. They like the milk cans at Kelly's.
Well, they're gonna love the birdhouse we put up today.
Oh my goodness.
The
cool.
purple martin house. It's a barn-shaped martin house. Let me tell you something. This is going to be something special.
Neat.
It really is.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And by the way, since we're talking about nurseries, Rosedale down in Westchester County is another big native plant supplier through the native plant group.
Cool. Someone asks, what do you suggest for protecting plants that the deer like that you already have?
Well, that's a tough question to answer, and a lot of it depends on the deer palette in your area. Like I said, there are some areas that if you want to do some gardening, it requires a fence or netting. There are still some good sprays out there, but I think if I'm a gardener and I want to do some work and plant just whatever I want that's native in my zone, and I don't want to worry about deer, then I'm going to put 8-foot gaucho game fencing around my property, and the only thing that's going to be able to climb over it is a bear.
Okay, so you don't recommend Milorganite, or it doesn't really?
Milorganite is okay. I mean, there was a Milorganite, it was taken off the market a while back because of heavy metals. People were using it as a fertilizer for their vegetable garden to keep the bunnies and the woodchucks out. But they found that it had heavy metals in it, and they said they cleaned it up, but it's not as readily available. I'm finding it's not as readily available as it used to be. Eggs, if you make your own, you can make your own concoction of deer repellent with hot pepper. It's almost like a sun tea. Deer hate the smell and taste of eggs. So if you mix eggs with like hot peppers and let it sit out in the hot sun for a day or two, and mix it with a little oil, you'll watch them screaming out of your yard looking for the nearest stream.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Deb says private property owners with 10 acres at least. There's a new DEC grant program, Regenerate New York, and it helps with deer fencing, invasive removals, and native species planting. And she gave the website for that.
That's a great. I would go there tomorrow if I'm having tonight if I'm having deer problems, because it sounds like a real great way to spend our tax dollars. Let me tell you, getting, everybody's home, everybody's into vegetable garden, everybody's into fruit trees, hey, let's go out there and do it. And if the state's willing to help us, go for it.
Wonderful. Someone wants you to restate the name of the wildflower seminar.
There's a guy named Weiner. And if you Google his name, he's like the guru of meadow, the meadow science. I can't remember his first name. But anyway,
W-I-E-N-E-R.
Weiner, Weiner.
E-I, okay.
No, it's not. His name is Weiner, and he does a lot of seminars on wildflower meadows. I've been to one of his about 10 or 15 years ago. He's very good. And he really dives into the science behind, what type of wildflower meadow plants you can grow in your particular location. There's another company out there called Ernst Conservation Seed that we use all the time. And what they're all about is, we do a lot of soil tests, and we have them make special mixes for us so that, if it's a little bit wet, you're going to have a little bit of more swamp milkweed in it and stuff like that. So, it's important to know your soils before you dive into this, because these seeds are very expensive. And if you fail, it can be, it could be a nightmare. You just gotta follow, seed in late summer, hopefully you won't get a hurricane. If it's too dry, you got to do a little bit of watering, and then next season you got to mow it. The next 2 or 3 years you got to mow it so the competition is down. And in that third or fourth season, you let it go, and it really is a spectacular sight.
Interesting. Unfortunately, Barbara says she ended up getting healthy stilt grass, and then she had to get rid of that.
Yeah. Well, okay. That's why he recommends a clean plate before you get started, and that's why a lot of his success stories start with a total kill.
Okay, interesting. So Adrian says, any help available for those of us who own an acre or 3? I'm not quite sure help in what regard she's asking.
Well, tell her to call me, and I'll be over tomorrow, and I'll give her some sound advice.
Well, it doesn't get better than that. How about that, Adrian? Abby says, we agree about grass lawns, and we hate to use weed killer, but what do you recommend about creeping Charlie / ground ivy? We hate it.
Yeah, that's a tough one. A lot of it, sometimes verticutting works. Sometimes if it's an infestation, you got to get in there and do it almost mechanically. And if it's a small enough site, maybe it's doable that way. A lot of times, if it's really, really, really bad, I suggest tilling it over and starting all over again.
Okay. Question from Lori: what milkweed is the most successful type of plant in the Hudson Valley for butterflies?
Oh, I think the swamp milkweed. You see I think all the milkweeds are great for the Hudson Valley, right from the Asclepias tuberosa. There's 2 or 3. There's an upland milkweed, and then there's the swamp milkweed. I think they're all bulletproof, hardy, and it's I would try them all. If you got a little bit of a wetland area, or if you got a little bit of a wet spot, I would try them all. I think they're all easy to grow, and they're all native to the area.
Great. Okay. Deb says she will look for smaller private property grants and let me know for community educational Native American projects. Okay, we've got one website here, wildones.org, that she's sharing. Let's see. Adrian says, if it doesn't poison the sacrificial deer, they eat it, including my boxwood. I won't use Milorganite because it's a nerve toxin. Okay.
Yes, I heard of that. Well,
Yeah.
let me just talk a little bit about the deer, because there's a midge fly. I don't know if anybody knows this, but there's a deer pandemic going on out there right now, and it's being created by the midge fly in the fall. We had a lot of deer in the Great Swamp here over in Pawling and Patterson that had to be taken out of the swamp with front end loaders because the midge fly gets in there. They bite the deer. The deer gets a very high fever, gets dehydrated. It's a horrible way to die. The head swells up, it goes to water, and it's dead. I would say at least half, a third to a half of all of our deer are gone because of this midge fly virus. I don't know
Wow.
if anybody is aware of that. I know it's in Westchester pretty bad. I know it's in, over the line in Connecticut. Some of the estates that I maintain over in Connecticut and down in Westchester have had, much less deer browse this winter. And that surprised me because, Westchester and Putnam County had a lot of snow this winter. They had more snow than we had up here in Dutchess County. And they had very little deer damage down there because of the fewer deer because of the pandemic down in that part of the state.
Interesting. Okay. Somebody wanted to know, oh yeah, deer have destroyed the understory. Of course, all the invasives are left. Somebody wants to know, is it Larry Weiner?
Larry Weiner. Thank
Yes?
you. That's
Okay.
it. That's him.
All right. Okay.
He's the meadow guru.
Meadow Guru, Larry Weiner. All right. Let's see. Deb wants to know, can you name the 3 best plants, shrubs and trees for wet shade?
Well, there's a lot of great plants for wet shade. Button bush, if you've never grown button bush, that loves the wet, and that's got the most beautiful unusual flower of any shrub in the woods, one of my favorites. If you wanted to go with some evergreen, Ilex glabra can tolerate wet. Some of the native azaleas, the wetland azaleas are absolutely beautiful. They're almost exotic looking. The marsh marigolds. I mean, the list is very extensive on what'll survive in a wetland, even in a standing water situation, all the way up to riparian zones. There's a big group of plants that like that type of environment.
So Peter, you've mentioned earlier that you have lists and lists and lists. Are these things that you have like printed out at your center, that if people come, they can get a list of
Of all, get a copy of all our lists?
Yeah.
As soon as you come into the garden center, there's a little table on the left-hand side that has every one of our lists. I made them about 10 years ago when I was first sitting on the Dover Planning Board. I'm kind of the environmentalist in Dover, and I work with a local with you guys, Joe Berger of Berger Engineering. Joe and I have done a few projects together, and he's the engineer for the town of Dover. But these lists I made for the town so that if a contractor came in and they wanted to landscape their property and they happened to be in the limestone soil, here's a list of plants we recommend. And it's up to 15 lists now. And if you just email me, I'll send you all 15 lists.
Oh, well, that would be great. Yeah, we love lists. Eileen has her hand raised. Eileen, would you have a question for Peter?
Yes, I'm finding more strawberries on my property this year, and I would like to transplant them down to a barren, shady area. what's the best time to transplant, now that they're flowering, or wait till the fall?
Well, what you want to do is you want to wait till they start developing runners. And the runners are what you want to transplant. Because if
Oh,
the runners will, depending on the size of your strawberries, the runners can be anywhere between 1 inch and 4 inches long. And if you bury the runners in the ground, that becomes the roots for the new plants.
oh, okay, thank you.
And you can do that anytime, Peter?
Um, I would do it in late summer, early fall. Water is everything. You could do it now, but you better be prepared to water them all summer until they really get rooted in. And I'm going to be, it's going to be a dry summer. It was a very dry spring, and all indications point that it's going to be a dry summer. And in fact, we just had this meeting this morning about that. Every new landscape project that I bid on or propose moving forward is going to have a 1-year irrigation system put into it, just to keep things alive throughout this dry summer. So that's, usually in April and May, we get enough rain, and like the end of April, the ground is a quagmire. This year it wasn't that way. And if you look how windy it's been, I mean, today was and when it gets windy like this, it acts like a wick for trees. I'm getting a lot of calls from landscapes that I put in last fall that feel that their plants have been struggling this spring. What do you think the problem is? And I says, well, it's probably because their roots haven't developed enough to sustain themselves, and you're probably going to have to do some watering today. So, if you remember last summer, we came out of a 6-week drought. It was a dry summer last year. We had plenty of water this winter with all the rain and snow, but it's definitely been a dry summer, and the wind is even making it drier.
We have a couple of comments. Barbara had a diseased deer die in the backyard. The DEC said they had enough samples of dead deer, so they didn't have to come out and check it out.
Well, that's how bad the deer pandemic is.
Yeah.
It's
amazing.
really, I was talking to a couple of guys that were back in the Great Swamp, the DEC guys testing and hauling them out of there, and they were saying it was everything from big bucks to fawns that were dying.
Wow. Beth asks, are invasive plants getting worse? And what do you recommend to your landscaping clients about invasive plant control?
Well, the climate is changing, and because of that, some plants are loving this change and some plants are not. For instance, because there's more CO2 in the air, vines are just going crazy. The mile-a-minute vine, a lot of, like, if you go on the Sawmill Parkway or the Hutchinson River Parkway in Westchester County, those woods are just being choked out by bittersweet and all these invasive vines that are down there, and that's, vines are going crazy. Yes, there seems to be more invasive plants on the rise, because and there's a lot of things going on in the natural world. I mean, most forests in our area don't look good. They're not healthy. Ash trees are on the decline. There's a lot of trees that are suffering from this climate change, and a lot of the plants that we couldn't plant in our gardens up till this last decade are starting to migrate into our area. Like, we use a lot of American holly now, something that you very seldom found, back in nurseries 20 years ago, but now they're all over the place. And there's nothing more beautiful than a specimen American holly in front of your house. And, it's funny, the big question is always asked to me, do I need a male holly? Because you need male and female hollies to get berries. And I was told by a American holly grower down in Maryland 2 years ago that the Ilex verticillata, which is the winterberry holly, will pollinate the American holly and give it berries. He says, you'll never read this in any book, he says, but I've been doing this for 50 years, and I know it's the truth.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I get people coming here all the time looking for Jim Dandy and a lot of these male Ilex verticillata, and because I can say that it worked at my house. I put an American holly in about 10 years ago, and I don't have a male on my property, and it berries every year. So something's pollinated and something's giving it berries.
Okay. So Adrian asks, can you recommend a ground cover to place underneath the shrubs that will hopefully decrease weeding and grass growth underneath?
Yeah, there's, I mentioned before, strawberries, bearberry. There's a lot of different native ground covers you can use. I love moss phlox subulata. I think that's one of the most beautiful ground covers out there. There's our native Pachysandra, Allegheny spurge, which is a great ground cover. I love Christmas ferns. What another great ground cover. Evergreen fern, bulletproof. The deer will starve to death right next to it before it'll eat it. So there's a lot of ground covers out there that you can use that'll take the place of myrtle and Japanese spurge.
So someone's asking if the lists are available online. No.
They might be on our website. Check if they're
Okay.
not. I can have Adam put them up. But if if you can't find them, just email pete@nativelandscaping.net and request the lists, and we'll send them out tomorrow for you.
Okay, great. Why do nurseries keep selling invasive plants?
Okay, I'm going to guess at this because I don't know what's in their head, but I'm going to guess because they can make money on them.
Mhm.
I had a lady call me from Massachusetts about 5 years ago and said to me, "Do you sell Euonymus elatus?" And I said, "Absolutely not. It's a non-native invasive." She goes, "Well, it's against the law to sell them in Massachusetts, but I know it's not in New York." Click. So there's just a lot of people who are very selfish, I guess, is how it works. Maybe I don't know the answers to that question, but that's maybe something that you need. Go into a nursery and you see a lot of the stuff that really doesn't belong. Ask them about it and why they still sell it.
Are there associations? Are there landscaper associations, nursery associations, et cetera, where one could begin to affect that kind of change from the top down, like from national conferences and stuff like that?
I think there's a big push toward that. There's no new rules and regulations, but I can tell you what I do up here at Native Landscapes is basically the law and the rule down on Eastern Long Island and parts of Westchester County along, where any kind of landscape you do adjacent to the reservoir systems. There's these MS4 regulations in place that, you need to really look at your runoff. I mean, there's a lot of talk right now of what we're going to do about salt. We spread too much salt on our roads. There's a lot of things getting into our water that's creating a lot of problems. It really is an issue, and it needs to be addressed from the top down. But I firmly believe what Native Landscapes and Garden Center is doing today will be the rule, 10 or 15 years down the road. I think it's just heading in that direction.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, that's very encouraging. Terrific. It's 7 o'clock and we do have some comments. Thank you. Keep doing the good work. Great. Lists are helpful. We love it. Yeah. Big kudos to Peter and the work that you are doing. And you're very inspiring. It's been a great presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it started when it's a great concept. And the one thing I can tell you is, all the girls that work here in the garden center knew very little about this whole native plant concept. And once they learned, I'm getting emails at 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you should have just read what I just read at UVM. They're doing this. People get into it. It's something that draws you in. It lures you in.
Terrific. This is awesome. So I think we're going to have some folks coming to visit you in Pawling.
Well, you know what? We love the company. And, you know, like I said, bring your hiking shoes because we got some real neat wilderness behind the garden center here too.
Great. That's a good word to end on. Well, thank you so much, Peter. And thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. I will be putting the recording
Thank you.
out in a couple of days. So thank you all.